Hi everyone. I wanted to create this video as a supplement to the last video I did, which is around CoreData. So in the last video, we basically created our own data controller to load this NS persistent object called data model. Now I wanted to show what Xcode does when you generate kind of the core data code, and I wanted to pull that in here just to show you some of the differences and what it can do. So, as you noticed right now, one of the challenges is there's nothing that shows up in my preview because I didn't inject the information from the environment, this managed context object, into this environment here. And if you do try to inject it, it runs into some problems, namely because of the way it tries to bring in the data model. So let's go ahead and fire up a new project, and we're going to call it, you can call it, it's going to be a new iOS app, and we're just going to call it CoreData Sample SwiftUI, because we're going to delete this right after we're done. And we are going to use CoreData, so we kind of see what they produce, and we can pull it over to our project. So let's go ahead and create this. And you'll see that once it loads, that this project will actually render something in the content view. So you can see it loads basically 10 date timestamps from CoreData. And so if we kind of explore this, and I won't go too deep into this because there are a lot of videos out there that explore the structure of CoreData in SwiftUI, but they have an entity called item and one attribute called timestamp. And in that timestamp, it's basically just storing a bunch of date time instances. In this persistent controller, you'll see over here that it actually generates basically 10 new items and then saves this view context in memory, right? So when you're doing a preview, it stores it in memory, it saves the context in memory, and then that's how it returns and renders the 10 items over here. So let's go ahead and apply this to our project, and we'll just start from trying to follow along a little bit. And the first thing we'll pull over is this persistence file. And so what I'll do here is, instead of, I'll just copy everything. So we're going to use Command A over here to copy everything. Command C to copy. And then let's create a new file. Again, Control click. We're going to do a new file, and it's going to be a new Swift file. And click on Next, and we'll call it persistence. And I will create it in this Todoey SwiftUI. And in this, I'm just going to, again, Control A on everything, and Control V. So, I'm sorry, Command A and Command V. So this is now our persistence controller. And immediately it's going to complain, right? Because for a variety of reasons, right? The item that we created does not have a member timestamp, so it's not going to be there. And we also don't have the right persistent container if we are not trying to load it from memory and actually from our data model over here. So let's go ahead and correct some of these issues in the persistence model, and then we'll move on to editing some things within our SwiftUI app up here, and then changing something around in our to-do list view, and then we can get rid of this data controller when we're done. All right, so starting with the persistence, let's make this obvious switch right here. So the name is not core data sample, it is data model, which matches up with the name right here. All right. Next, we want to make some changes here because timestamp is not an item in here. So what do we have in here? New item dot, and let's see if it actually has the items that we already have. So title. So we have a title, and we're going to just generate some sort of item title 10 times, and new item dot done. Right. The default of this was false, but let's do a random boolean. So there's a bool and a random command. So it just returns a random value. So we're going to have both checks and minuses. And again, this is just for our preview. We're not trying to do anything with our actual true data. This is just, we're not storing this in our data model or our SQLite database. We're just trying to generate a bunch of values and things like that so that we can see what our screens look like when we work on them. All right, so I think that does it for the persistence piece. And next, we're going to go into this part right here, our Todoey SwiftUI app. And we're going to have to, previously we loaded this data controller. We are going to load, instead of our data controller, let's load the persistence controller. And if we go back to this core example.swift, you can actually see in their example, this is how they load it. So you know what, why don't we just take this line, we'll copy it again, let's Command C, go back to our Todoey, paste that in there. So we're gonna open up a persistent controller and set it to this persistence controller variable. And then down here, of course, data controller does not exist anymore, and you want to load this environment. So we will then go back to our course data sample, and we're going to pull this line. So you can see, and I'm going to put these lines side by side when we're down here. So you'll see the difference is really two things. One is, instead of using this data controller, we're just using the persistence controller. So we're using this persistence struct as opposed to this data controller class that we created. Again, they essentially do the same thing. This just has a little bit more code around a preview, and then probably has a little bit more error handling. We probably should handle this error. I'm going to delete this comment for now. All right. So now that we have this loaded, and I'm gonna comment this piece out. We can now make our changes to our to-do list view. To-do list view. So again, all the way back up here. So our fetch request still is, we still need to fetch the data. So what we're going to do up here is we are going to, actually let's borrow what the out of the box project gives us. So let's take a look at what they do in content view here. So again, they also create their managed context object, but they call it view context. In ours, we called it context, so that's okay. That looks the same. I'm going to move it up just to make sure that we can see that they are in the same order as this. So they call it view context. I called it context. It's fine. And then down here, we're going to fetch the items. So again, I'm just going to copy this, and we're going to drop it right in here. And we can kind of see the difference. So you can see that this fetch request actually has a sort. So it's actually sorting on the timestamp and ascending true. We don't have a sort, and that's why in the previous video, every time we added a new value to our core data storage, it just showed up in whatever order. So what we're going to do is I'm going to delete this for now, and in later videos, again, like I mentioned, we will probably add some sort of date timestamp so that we can sort it in the order that we've added it in. So let's go ahead and delete that. I'll just take out the animation part. And you can see now that we have this private variable, let's just call it item array to make it, we'll just make it var item array just to make it the same. And you'll see that basically these two lines are identical. So again, same thing that CoreData does. I'm just going to delete one of these. They're both essentially are the same thing, except in the sample that you have over here, there's a sort piece that's added to it. All right. So now we've added that. Let's see. Let's go down here, and one of the challenges is in our preview we don't have anything injected in here, which is why you don't see anything here. It's also loading. So let's go back to the CoreData sample. Let's go all the way down to see what they did in this injection. And so they injected this managed object context again, just like we have, if you remember, in our CoreData sample, right? This managed object context. And then instead of a persistent controller container view context, right, we are going to be loading a preview, so the preview container. And then when you go to persistence, you see that that's this preview area here under the struct. So let's go ahead and copy that. Copy this content view. go back to our project, and we're just going to inject it right here. So take out this content view portion. All right, environment, manage object context, persistent. And you'll see now that we have those 10 items. So again, in persistence, we load up these 10 items with the name item. And you know what? Why don't we just make it a little bit more obvious which ones are which. So let's just do let's do an index, 0 to 10. Actually, let's do it 1 to 10. We will do item, and we'll just append on this index. So we'll just have basically the item numbers. So let's take a look back at our view. And in our view, or our preview, whenever it loads, it should show up as 1 to 10. So let's see if it actually does do this. It should. I'm not sure why it's taking so long, so I'm going to pause here. All right, so there you can see that it's loaded kind of the 10 items here. And you can actually interact with your preview as well. Let's just make sure it works correctly when we run the app. So let's go ahead and run the app. And we have bananas, salt, oranges, chicken checked. Let's uncheck salt. So bananas, uncheck oranges, uncheck chicken. So just bananas are checked. If we terminate the app, we bring it back in. Just bananas are checked, right? So let's add a new item, make sure this works. And for my grocery store list, I'm going to need more garlic. So let's hit add. It adds garlic, again, in a strange area. So we will figure out how to handle that later. So let's check the first 3 items, bananas, apples, candy. Just make sure that if I terminate it, go back here, fire it up, bananas, apples, candy, all checked again. And we have our entire list. So again, in the simulator, it's reading from the SQLite database. And from over here, it's reading from this persistence preview that we're auto-generating. So we're generating these values and injecting it basically into the preview so that we can see what it looks like. And this is really helpful for previewing. So with that, we're actually not using the data controller anymore. I'm just going to delete this data controller file, move it to the trash. Let's double check everything works correctly still. Still building successfully. And check serial, marks it down there. We'll terminate the task again. We'll go back to serial, see if it works. Yep, serial's checked. And so there you go. That's really using kind of the out-of-the-box code that Xcode gives you. And we'll continue on from here. After this, I want to try to do, I think it adds a navigation or search bar to Todoey. And actually in Xcode 14 and I think iOS 16, it's actually pretty easy. It's just a single command. We'll get into it in the next video. And I think that's it. Other than that, I'm not going to make any more changes. I'm going to maybe modify this, add probably something else to work on, maybe making it sort a little bit better. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody.